The blood-stained letter trembled in Nora Nichols' hands as she stood frozen on the worn porch of her family's modest homestead outside Superior, Arizona Territory, 1883. Her brother Thomas had gambled away not only their ranch but her freedom as well. The brutal reality of her situation crashed over her like the summer thunderstorms that occasionally broke the desert heat. She was now property to be claimed by the territory's most notorious saloon owner. "You can't be serious, Thomas," Nora whispered, her voice barely audible above the desert wind whistling through the sparse mesquite trees surrounding their drought-stricken property. "You wagered me in a card game." Thomas Nichols, 3 years her senior at 26, couldn't meet her eyes. His once handsome face was gaunt, marked by the ravages of whiskey and poor decisions. The bruises along his jawline told of recent encounters with men who didn't appreciate being cheated. "I was winning, Nora, I swear it." His hands shook as he reached for the bottle on the table. Then everything turned. "Jameson said he'd forgive the debt if I signed you over for a year's service at the Silver Dollar." Nora's stomach twisted. Everyone knew what service at Jameson's saloon entailed. Women entered those swinging doors as people and left as hollow shells if they left at all. "How could you?" The paper crumpled in her fist. "I'm sorry," Thomas mumbled, not sounding sorry at all. "They're coming tomorrow, Jameson's men. If you run, they'll kill me, and probably find you anyway." Nora backed away, fighting nausea. She had one night to figure out how to escape a future that was unthinkable, a contract signed in her brother's desperate scrawl, and her name at the bottom like merchandise on a bill of sale. The sound of approaching hoofbeats the next morning sent ice through Nora's veins. She'd spent the night alternating between crying and packing a small bag, but with nowhere to go and no money, her options had dwindled to none. Thomas had disappeared before dawn, likely to avoid witnessing what he'd done. Nora stepped onto the porch, her simple blue dress her best, a poor armor against what was coming. But rather than Jameson's usual thugs, a single rider approached, his black hat pulled low over his face, the morning sun silhouetting his broad shoulders. The stranger dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. As he stepped into the light, Nora saw a face weathered by sun and wind, with eyes the color of the Arizona sky after a storm. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, but something about the quiet strength in his stance made her breath catch. "Miss Nichols." His voice was deep with a slight rasp. "If you're here for Jameson, I won't go quietly." Nora raised her chin, trying to hide her fear. The man's expression softened slightly. "My name's Preston James. I own the Diamond J Ranch north of here." He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a folded document. "I believe this belongs to you." Nora recognized it instantly, the contract Thomas had signed. "I don't understand." Preston James held it out. "Take it." With trembling fingers, Nora accepted the paper. "Why?" "Because no person should own another." Without ceremony, he reached out and tore the paper in 2, then 4 pieces, letting the desert breeze carry them away. "That contract no longer exists." Nora stared at him in disbelief. "You bought my contract from Jameson just to tear it up." "I did." "Why would you do that for a stranger?" A shadow crossed his face. "Let's just say I've seen what Jameson does to women in your situation. Couldn't stand by and let it happen again." Nora studied him, searching for the catch, the hidden motive. Men didn't simply ride in and rescue women without wanting something in return. "What do you want from me, Mr. James?" "Nothing you're not willing to give." He glanced at the dilapidated homestead. "Though I could use a housekeeper at my ranch. Proper job, proper wages, your own quarters, no funny business. And if I refuse, then you're free to go wherever you please." Preston adjusted his hat. "But I wouldn't recommend staying here. Jameson isn't known for accepting losses gracefully. As if summoned by his name, dust rose on the horizon, riders approaching fast. Preston's hand moved to his holster. "That's likely Jameson's men," he said quietly. "Decision time, Miss Nichols." Nora grabbed her small bag from just inside the door. "I'll accept your offer, Mr. James." He nodded once, helping her onto his horse before mounting behind her. "Hold on." Nora felt the solid wall of his chest against her back as they rode away from the only home she'd ever known, toward an uncertain future that somehow seemed less frightening than the one she'd just escaped. The Diamond J Ranch sprawled across 5,000 acres of Arizona territory, nestled against the foothills where desert gave way to pine forest. As they crested the final rise after hours of riding, Nora gasped at the sight. A sturdy two-story ranch house of stone and timber stood sentinel over corrals, bunkhouses, and outbuildings. Cattle dotted the distant pastures, and a creek, a genuine creek with flowing water, cut through the property. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's home," Preston replied simply, his breath warm against her ear. As they approached, ranch hands paused in their work to stare. Nora felt self-conscious about her dusty appearance and the impropriety of arriving with a man she barely knew. An older woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled into a severe bun, and she squinted at them with obvious disapproval. "This is Mrs. Abernathy," Preston said as he helped Nora dismount. "She's been keeping house for me since my parents passed." "And who might this young woman be?" Mrs. Abernathy asked, her tone suggesting she already had her own unflattering conclusions. "Miss Nora Nichols. She'll be joining the household staff." Preston's tone left no room for argument. "Please show her to the room at the east end of the hall and find her whatever she needs." Mrs. Abernathy's lips thinned to a tight line. "As you wish." Preston turned to Nora. "Get settled in. We'll talk more at supper." As he strode away toward the barn, Nora followed Mrs. Abernathy into the house, aware of the older woman's simmering judgment. "I don't know what arrangement you have with Mr. James," Mrs. Abernathy said once they were inside, "but this is a respectable house." "It's not what you're thinking," Nora replied, her cheeks burning. "He saved me from a terrible situation. I'm only here as household help." Mrs. Abernathy's expression softened slightly. "Well, we'll see, won't we? This way, please." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and small dresser. A window overlooked the eastern pasture, and Nora could see mountains in the distance. After the hardscrabble existence on her brother's failing ranch, it seemed luxurious. "Supper's at 6 sharp," Mrs. Abernathy informed her. "There's water in the pitcher if you'd like to freshen up." Left alone, Nora sank onto the bed and finally allowed herself to process the day's events. Tears came, unbidden tears of relief, confusion, and lingering fear. What had she gotten herself into? Preston James seemed honorable enough, but she'd learned the hard way that men's true natures often revealed themselves slowly. When she descended for supper, wearing her one other dress, a faded green calico, she found Preston already seated at the head of a large oak table. He rose when she entered, a gesture of respect she hadn't expected. "Miss Nichols." He nodded toward the place setting to his right. "Please join me." Mrs. Abernathy served a hearty meal of beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie that made Nora realize how poorly she'd been eating these past months. They ate in silence until Preston finally spoke. "I imagine you have questions." Nora set down her spoon. "Several, starting with why you really brought me here." Preston's eyes met hers directly. "I told you, I need household help. You have Mrs. Abernathy. She's getting on in years. Can't manage it all alone anymore." And that's worth buying a stranger's contract, Nora pressed. Preston sighed, setting aside his napkin. My sister Elizabeth was in a similar situation 5 years ago. Different circumstances, same outcome. Jameson got his hands on her. His voice hardened. By the time I found her, she was broken, died of laudanum not long after. I'm sorry, Nora whispered. When I heard in town that Thomas Nichols had wagered his sister to cover gambling debts, I couldn't stand by. He looked away. You reminded me of her, someone who deserved better than what fate handed them. The sincerity in his voice made it hard for Nora to maintain her suspicion. Thank you for being honest, and for what you did. You'll earn your keep here, Preston assured her. I don't believe in charity. What exactly will my duties be? Helping Mrs. Abernathy with the cooking and cleaning, mending, maybe teaching reading to some of the ranch hands' children once a week. He smiled slightly. Thomas mentioned you were a schoolteacher before your parents died. The mention of her former life brought a pang of loss. Yes, I was. Then that skill shouldn't go to waste. Preston stood. We start early here, breakfast at 5. After he left, Nora helped Mrs. Abernathy clear the table. He's a good man, the older woman said unexpectedly. Honorable to a fault. Lost too much too young. His sister, his parents to smallpox 2 years before that, and his wife in childbirth along with their baby boy. Mrs. Abernathy handed Nora a plate to dry. He doesn't let people close anymore. Nora absorbed this information, finding herself curious about the man who'd rescued her. How long have you known him? Since he was born. I was his mother's friend. The older woman's eyes grew distant. This place used to be full of laughter. Now it's just work and more work. He's built the largest ranch in the county, but for what? No joy in it for him. That night, Nora lay in her new bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. She thought of Preston James's eyes when he spoke of his sister, the pain there, and the guilt. Perhaps they weren't so different, both trapped by circumstances and the actions of others, both trying to find their way forward. Morning came with a gentle knock on her door. Mrs. Abernathy handed her a simple work dress and apron. These were Elizabeth's, she explained. Should fit well enough until we can get to town for fabric. The mention of Preston's sister made the garments feel weighted with significance. Nora thanked her and dressed quickly, finding that the clothing did indeed fit as though made for her. The kitchen was already bustling when she entered. Mrs. Abernathy directed her to help with breakfast flapjacks, bacon, and strong coffee for the dozen ranch hands who filed in noisily. Preston entered last, nodding a brief greeting to Nora before taking his place. The day established a pattern that would become familiar in the weeks ahead. Mornings were for cooking and cleaning, afternoons for mending and laundry. Preston was often absent, riding out at dawn to check cattle or negotiate with buyers, returning only for the evening meal. Gradually, Nora settled into life at the Diamond J. The initial wariness of the ranch hands gave way to respectful acceptance, especially after she began teaching 3 of their children to read in the evenings. Mrs. Abernathy, too, warmed to her, sharing recipes and stories of the ranch's earlier days. It was nearly 3 weeks after her arrival when Thomas Nichols rode into the yard one afternoon, clearly drunk and belligerent. "Where's my sister?" he demanded of the ranch hand who intercepted him. Nora heard the commotion from the porch where she was shelling peas. Setting aside her work, she approached her brother cautiously. "Thomas, what are you doing here?" He swayed in his saddle. "Came to take you home, Nora. Our troubles are over." "What are you talking about?" "One big last night, enough to buy back the ranch." His bloodshot eyes darted around. "Where's James?" "Need to buy back your contract." Nora's heart sank. "There is no contract anymore, Thomas. Mr. James tore it up, and I'm not coming back with you." Thomas dismounted unsteadily. "Don't be stupid. You belong with family. The family that sold me to cover gambling debts." The words burned her throat. "I said I was sorry." Thomas took a threatening step forward but froze at the sound of a pistol being cocked. Preston stood on the porch, his revolver aimed steadily at Thomas. "That's far enough, Nichols. This is between me and my sister," Thomas slurred. "Not on my property." Preston's voice was cold. "Miss Nichols works for me now of her own free will. She stays or goes as she chooses." Thomas looked between them, comprehension slowly dawning on his drunken features. "So that's how it is." "You took my sister as your—" "Finish that sentence and you'll regret it," Preston warned. Nora stepped between them. "You need to leave, Thomas. I'm staying here." Her brother spat on the ground. "Fine. Enjoy your new protector. When he tires of you, don't come crawling back." As Thomas rode away, Nora felt Preston's presence behind her. "I'm sorry about that," she said quietly. "No need to apologize for him." Preston holstered his weapon. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though tears threatened. "He's the only family I have left." "Sometimes the family we choose is better than the one we're born to." Preston's hand hovered near her shoulder as if he wanted to offer comfort but wasn't sure how. Finally, he simply said, "You have a place here as long as you want it." That evening, Nora found Preston on the front porch, staring out at the sunset painting the desert in shades of orange and purple. She brought him a cup of coffee and settled into the chair beside him. "Thank you for earlier," she said. Preston accepted the coffee with a nod. "Your brother had no right to speak to you that way. He wasn't always like this," Nora sighed. "After our parents died, something changed in him. It was like he couldn't bear the responsibility." "Some men can't face their own failures," Preston replied. "They run from them instead of standing firm." They sat in companionable silence, watching the colors deepen across the landscape. Nora found herself studying Preston's profile, the strong jaw, the lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting against the sun, the slight downturn of his mouth that seemed more habit than natural expression. "Mrs. Abernathy told me about your wife," Nora said gently. "I'm sorry for your loss." Preston's fingers tightened around his cup. "Caroline, it was 10 years ago. Do you mind if I ask about her?" He was quiet so long that Nora thought he wouldn't answer. Then, softly, "She loved music, played the piano beautifully. Used to talk about getting a real piano shipped out from back east." A faint smile touched his lips. "She had freckles across her nose that she hated but I thought were charming." "She sounds lovely." She was. Preston set his empty cup aside. "This place was different when she was alive." "When my family was alive. It's a beautiful home." "It's a ranch," he corrected. "Hasn't felt like a home in a long time." The vulnerability in his admission touched something in Nora. On impulse, she reached out and laid her hand over his. "Thank you for sharing that with me." Preston looked surprised at the contact but didn't pull away. For a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of shared loneliness. Then he stood abruptly. "Getting late. Cattle drive starts tomorrow. I'll be gone for 2 weeks at least." Nora felt the loss of connection like a physical thing. "Safe travels, Mr. James." He paused at the door. "You should call me Preston. Mr. James was my father." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her with the lingering warmth of his hand beneath hers, and the curious sensation of having glimpsed something precious and rare. The cattle drive took Preston away for nearly 3 weeks. In his absence, Nora found herself taking on more responsibilities around the ranch house. When Mrs. Abernathy fell ill with a summer fever, Nora nursed her through it while managing the household alone. One afternoon, as she was hanging laundry, A cloud of dust on the horizon announced riders approaching. Her first thought was of Preston returning, but as the group drew closer, she recognized Jameson himself leading several rough-looking men. Cold fear gripped her. She hurried inside to where Mrs. Abernathy was resting. "Men coming," she said tersely. "Jameson and his thugs." Mrs. Abernathy struggled to sit up. "The rifle in Mr. James's study. Know how to use it," Nora nodded, having grown up learning to shoot on the frontier. She retrieved the Winchester and positioned herself at the front window as the riders pulled up in the yard. Jameson was a corpulent man with a waxed mustache and small, cruel eyes. He dismounted with effort, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. Come out, Miss Nichols," he called. "Just want to have a friendly word with you." Nora opened the door a crack, keeping the rifle visible. "Mr. James isn't here." Jameson smiled unpleasantly. "I know. That's why we came. Your brother's gotten himself into trouble again. Seems he owes me more money than ever." "That's no concern of mine." "Oh, but it is. He's offered up your contract again, said James hadn't paid in full." Jameson's smile widened. "I've come to collect what's mine." "The contract was destroyed," Nora stated firmly, "and I am not property to be traded." "Pretty speech, but the law says different. A woman's debts are covered by her male relations." Jameson stepped forward. "Come along peacefully and maybe I won't have the boys burn this place to the ground." Nora raised the rifle. "Take one more step and you'll regret it." Jameson laughed. "You won't shoot." The crack of the rifle split the air as Nora fired, the bullet kicking up dirt inches from Jameson's boot. His smug expression vanished. "The next one won't miss," she promised, her voice steady despite her racing heart. One of Jameson's men reached for his gun, but Jameson raised a hand to stop him. Now, let's not be hasty. Perhaps we can come to an arrangement." "There's nothing to arrange. My brother has no claim on me, and neither do you." "James paid only half the contract price," Jameson countered. "I'm entitled to the rest." "Then take it up with him when he returns." Nora kept the rifle trained on Jameson's substantial chest. "Now get off this property." A new voice joined the confrontation. "I'd listen to the lady if I were you." Nora felt a surge of relief as Miguel Ortiz, the ranch foreman, stepped onto the porch beside her, his own revolver drawn. Behind him, several ranch hands appeared, all armed. Jameson's face purpled with rage, but he was no fool. Outgunned, he backed toward his horse. "This isn't over. James can't be here to protect you forever." "I don't need protection," Nora replied. "I just demonstrated that." As Jameson and his men rode away, Miguel turned to her with newfound respect. "Señorita Nichols, I did not know you could shoot like that." "There's a lot you don't know about me, Mr. Ortiz." Nora lowered the rifle, suddenly feeling the trembling in her limbs. The boss will be proud when he hears. Miguel's weathered face broke into a rare smile. "We will keep extra watch until he returns." That evening, Nora sat beside Mrs. Abernathy's bed, recounting what had happened. "You stood your ground," the older woman said approvingly. "Not many would have the courage." "I was terrified," Nora admitted. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it." Mrs. Abernathy reached for Nora's hand. "Preston will be furious when he finds out Jameson came here. I handled it." "Yes, you did." Mrs. Abernathy studied her with shrewd eyes. "You care for him, don't you?" Nora felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mr. James is my employer. And the sky is blue. Neither statement answers my question." Nora looked away. "It doesn't matter how I feel, he still loves his wife." "Caroline's been gone 10 years, Mrs. Abernathy said gently, "and I've seen how he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching." "How is that?" "Like a man seeing the sun after a long winter." The older woman squeezed her hand. "Don't discount the possibility of happiness, child. It's rare enough in this life." Preston returned 4 days later, his face weathered from weeks on the trail. Nora watched from the kitchen window as he dismounted, his movements betraying exhaustion. Their eyes met briefly through the glass, and something in his expression shifted, a softening that made her heart quicken. Miguel approached him immediately, gesturing animatedly. Preston's posture stiffened as the foreman related the incident with Jameson. His gaze snapped back to the window, intense and unreadable. Nora busied herself with dinner preparations, unsure whether to expect anger or concern. When the kitchen door swung open, she turned to find Preston standing there, hat in hand, trail dust still clinging to his clothing. "Miguel tells me you stood down Jameson and his men," he said without preamble. Nora straightened her spine. "I did what was necessary. You could have been hurt." His voice was gruff with what might have been worry. "But I wasn't." She met his gaze steadily. "I can take care of myself, Preston. I've been doing it most of my life." A strange expression crossed his face at her use of his given name the first time she'd said it aloud. "So I see." He set his hat on the table. "Thank you for protecting my home." The word home lingered between them, weighted with meaning. "You're welcome." Preston seemed about to say more, but Mrs. Abernathy entered the kitchen then, exclaiming over his return and insisting he sit down for a proper meal. The moments slipped away, yet Nora felt that something fundamental had shifted between them. That night, unable to sleep, Nora went downstairs for a glass of water. She was surprised to find light still glowing from Preston's study. The door stood ajar, and through the gap she could see him at his desk, head bowed over ledgers, a glass of whiskey at his elbow. She must have made some small sound, for he looked up suddenly. "Nora, I'm sorry to disturb you," she said. "I couldn't sleep." Instead of dismissing her, Preston gestured to a chair. "Neither could I. Too many nights under the stars, I suppose." Nora hesitated, then entered, taking the offered seat. "Was the drive successful?" "Very. Got good prices in Tucson." He closed the ledger. "But that's not what's keeping me awake." "What is?" Preston studied his whiskey glass as if it held answers. "I keep thinking about what could have happened if Jameson had come when you were alone." "But I wasn't alone," Nora pointed out, "and I handled it. This time." Preston's eyes met hers, troubled. "Jameson doesn't give up easily. He'll be back. Then we'll handle him again." "We?" Preston raised an eyebrow. "This is my home now, too," Nora said quietly. "I'll defend it alongside you." Something flickered in Preston's expression, surprise, followed by a warmth she hadn't seen before. "Yes, I suppose it is your home." He rose and moved to a cabinet, returning with a small box. "I've been meaning to give you this. Seems more urgent now." Inside the box lay a small silver revolver, elegant but functional. "It was Caroline's," Preston explained. "She believed every woman on the frontier should know how to protect herself." Nora lifted the weapon, testing its weight. "It's beautiful, like its new owner." The words seemed to surprise Preston as much as Nora. He cleared his throat. "I mean, it suits you." Their eyes held for a long moment. Nora felt her pulse quicken at the intensity of his gaze. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll treasure it." "I hope you never need to use it." Preston hesitated, then added, "But I sleep better knowing you can." The simple statement revealed more about his feelings than perhaps he intended. Nora returned the revolver to its box, acutely aware of the narrowing space between them, both physical and emotional. "I should get that water and return to bed," she said, though leaving was the last thing she wanted. Preston nodded, stepping back. "Of course. Good night, Nora." "Good night, Preston." As she climbed the stairs, Nora felt his eyes following her, and for the first time since coming to the Diamond J, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she was more than just an employee, a future where the connection growing between them might blossom into something deeper. Summer gave way to autumn, bringing cooler temperatures and changing routines on the ranch. Nora had fully taken over management of the household, freeing Mrs. Abernathy to focus on her increasingly popular preserves and baking, which Preston had begun selling in Superior. The dynamics between Nora and Preston had shifted subtly since the night he'd given her Caroline's revolver. He sought her company more often, lingering after meals to discuss books or local news. Sometimes they simply sat on the porch in companionable silence, watching the sunset paint the mountains. One crisp October morning, Preston found Nora in the garden, harvesting the last of the summer vegetables before frost could claim them. "I'm riding into town," he announced. "Thought you might want to come along. Pick out some fabric for new dresses." Nora looked up, surprised by the invitation. "I'd like that." An hour later, they rode into Superior side by side. The small mining town was bustling with activity, miners coming off shift, shopkeepers hawking their wares, ladies in their finery promenading along the boardwalk. Nora was acutely aware of the glances they drew. A woman riding alongside Preston James, rather than in a wagon or carriage, was bound to raise eyebrows. But Preston seemed oblivious to the attention, helping her dismount in front of the general store with casual grace. Inside, the shopkeeper's wife, Mrs. Thompson, greeted them warmly. "Mr. James, how lovely to see you in town." Her curious gaze shifted to Nora. "And this must be Miss Nichols. We've heard so much about you." Nora smiled politely, wondering exactly what the town had heard. "A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Thompson." "Miss Nichols needs fabric for new dresses," Preston explained, "and whatever else she requires." Mrs. Thompson's eyebrows rose slightly. "Of course, we have some lovely new bolts just arrived from back east." As Nora examined the fabrics, she overheard Mrs. Thompson speaking to Preston in low tones. "Such a lovely young woman, and so capable from what I hear, running your household so efficiently." "She's been invaluable," Preston replied. "It does a heart good to see you in town with a companion," Mrs. Thompson continued. "It's been too long since." "Yes, well." Preston cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Has that order of fence wire come in?" Nora pretended not to have heard, but the exchange warmed her. The townspeople were drawing their own conclusions about her relationship with Preston, conclusions that secretly pleased her, even as she knew they weren't accurate. Not yet, anyway. After selecting several fabrics and other necessities, they stepped back onto the boardwalk. Preston glanced at the timepiece from his vest pocket. Nearly noon. "Shall we get some lunch at the hotel restaurant?" The prospect of dining publicly with Preston, like a proper couple, made Nora's heart flutter. "I'd like that very much." The Superior Hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in town, with white tablecloths and actual silverware. Preston led her to a table by the window, pulling out her chair with the natural courtesy that always surprised her, given his rugged exterior. They had just placed their orders when the restaurant door opened, and Thomas Nichols walked in, accompanied by a man Nora recognized with dread, Gabriel Jameson. Preston's posture immediately stiffened. His hand moved instinctively toward his holstered revolver before he caught himself. "Ignore them," he advised quietly. But it was too late. Thomas had spotted them, his face lighting with malicious glee as he nudged Jameson and pointed in their direction. "Well, well," Thomas drawled, approaching their table. "My sister and her protector, dining in public like proper folk." Nora felt her cheeks burn, both with embarrassment and anger. "Thomas, you're not welcome at our table." "Our table," he mimicked. "Hear that, Jameson? Already talking like a married woman." Preston stood slowly, his height and breadth suddenly imposing. "You're interrupting our meal, Nichols. I suggest you move along." Jameson stepped forward, his florid face creased in a smirk. "Now, James, is that any way to greet business associates? After all, we have mutual interests." His gaze slid to Nora in a way that made her skin crawl. "We have no business," Preston stated flatly. "And if you value your health, you'll stop looking at Miss Nichols like that." Several diners had stopped eating to watch the confrontation. The restaurant owner hovered nervously nearby. "The contract wasn't fulfilled," Jameson insisted. "You paid only half the agreed sum." "There was no agreed sum because there was no legal contract," Preston countered. "A woman isn't property to be traded." Thomas snorted. "Tell that to the territorial judge. Family debts can be settled in court if you're so inclined," Preston interrupted. "But I don't think you want your gambling and attempted human trafficking examined too closely by the law, do you, Nichols?" Thomas paled slightly. Jameson laid a restraining hand on his arm. "This isn't over, James," the saloon owner warned. "Every man has his price, and every woman." Preston's fists clenched at his sides. "Get out, now." For a tense moment, Nora feared violence would erupt in the middle of the restaurant. Then Jameson smiled thinly, tipping his hat with mock courtesy. "Another time, then. Good day, Miss Nichols. I do hope we'll become better acquainted soon." After they departed, Preston sank back into his chair, his face tight with controlled anger. "I'm sorry you had to endure that." Nora reached across the table, boldly taking his hand. "It's not your fault, and I'm not afraid of them. Maybe you should be." Preston's fingers curled around hers. "Jameson is dangerous when crossed, and your brother seems determined to cause trouble. Let them try." Nora squeezed his hand. "I'm not alone anymore." Something in Preston's expression softened. He looked down at their joined hands, then back at her face with a warmth that made her breath catch. "No," he agreed quietly. "You're not alone." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken feelings. Around them, the restaurant had returned to its normal hum of conversation, but Nora barely noticed. In that instant, only Preston existed, his blue eyes holding hers, his calloused hand warm against her skin, the promise of something more hovering just beyond reach. Their ride back to the ranch was subdued, both lost in thought about the confrontation and its implications. As they crested the final hill overlooking the Diamond J, Preston reined in his horse. "I need to tell you something," he said, his expression grave. "About Jameson." Nora waited, sensing the importance of whatever he was about to share. "Before I bought your contract, Jameson approached me with a business proposition, wanted to expand his operation beyond Superior." Preston's jaw tightened. "He suggested the Diamond J would be a perfect location for a high-class establishment catering to wealthy cattlemen and mine owners." "You refused," Nora stated rather than asked. "Of course, but he didn't take it well." Preston stared out at his land, his voice hardening. "Then I heard about your situation and interfered with his plans again. He's not a man who forgives being thwarted." "You think he's using Thomas to get to you, through me?" Preston nodded grimly. "I think he sees an opportunity to acquire both things. He wants you and a foothold on my land." The thought sent a chill through Nora despite the afternoon warmth. "What can we do?" "Be vigilant. And—" Preston hesitated, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "There might be a way to remove at least part of the threat." "How?" He turned to face her fully, his expression unreadable. "If you were no longer under your brother's legal authority, he couldn't make claims on you." Nora's breath caught as she realized what he was suggesting. "The only way that happens is if I marry." Preston nodded once, his gaze steady on hers. "Yes." The implication hung between them, enormous and unspoken. Nora's heart pounded in her ears as she searched his face for clues to his true feelings. "Are you proposing to me, Preston?" He looked momentarily startled, then rueful. "Not very well, it seems." He took a deep breath. I'm saying it would be a solution to the legal problem. A marriage of convenience, if you will. The hope that had flared in Nora's chest dimmed slightly. I see. A practical arrangement. At first, perhaps, Preston's voice softened. But I'd hope in time it might become more. Nora studied him, trying to read between the lines of his careful statement. And if it didn't, then you'd still have my name, my protection, and half interest in everything I own. He gestured toward the ranch below. You'd never have to fear being traded or sold again. It was a generous offer, more than most women in her position could ever hope for. Yet Nora found herself wanting something he hadn't explicitly offered his heart. I need time to consider, she said finally. Preston nodded, respect in his eyes. Of course, it's not a decision to make lightly. They rode the rest of the way in silence, each contemplating a future that suddenly held new possibilities and new uncertainties. That night, Nora lay awake, Preston's not-quite proposal turning in her mind. Marriage to him would solve her legal problems permanently. It would give her security, status, and a permanent home. But could she enter into such a union knowing he viewed it primarily as a practical solution? Mrs. Abernathy found her early the next morning, already at work in the kitchen, dark circles beneath her eyes betraying her sleepless night. You look like you've been wrestling angels, the older woman observed. Nora smiled wanly. Wrestling with decisions. About the boss's proposal. At Nora's surprised look, Mrs. Abernathy chuckled. These old ears still work, and these old eyes see how you two look at each other. Nora sighed. He offered marriage as a solution to my legal troubles with Thomas and Jameson, a practical arrangement. HMPH. Mrs. Abernathy began kneading dough with surprising vigor. That man, all business on the outside, afraid to admit what's in his heart. What do you mean? Preston James doesn't do anything without purpose. If he offered marriage even as a practical arrangement, it's because he wants you in his life permanently. She gave Nora a knowing look. The question is, do you want him in yours? I care for him, Nora admitted softly. More than I should, perhaps. Then tell him that. Mrs. Abernathy's tone brooked no argument. Men can be remarkably obtuse about feelings. Sometimes they need plain speaking. Nora considered this advice as she went about her morning tasks. By midday, she had made her decision. She found Preston in the barn, conferring with Miguel about the upcoming winter preparations. Might I have a word? She asked when there was a pause in their conversation. Preston nodded, excusing himself from the foreman. They walked together toward the corral, where several young horses pranced in the autumn sunshine. I've been thinking about your proposal, Nora began, gathering her courage. And? Preston's expression was carefully neutral, but she could see tension in the set of his shoulders. I have conditions. She met his gaze directly. A faint smile touched his lips. I expected no less. Name them. First, I won't be a silent partner in this ranch. If I'm to be your wife, even in name only, I want a real say in decisions. Preston nodded. Fair enough. Second, I want to expand the school lessons. Not just for the ranch children, but for anyone in the area who wants to learn. Perhaps even some of the ranch hands. Also reasonable. The bunkhouse could use more men who can read contracts and calculate figures. Nora took a deep breath. Third, and most importantly, I want a real marriage, not just a legal arrangement. Preston went very still. Meaning I won't enter into this unless there's potential for genuine feeling between us. Nora's voice wavered slightly, but she pressed on. I believe there already is, at least on my part. I care for you, Preston. I think you care for me too, though you're careful not to show it. Color rose in his tan cheeks. Nora, if I'm wrong, tell me now, she interrupted. But don't offer me half a life because it's convenient or because you feel responsible for me. I've had enough of being a burden or an obligation. Preston stepped closer, his eyes intent on hers. "Is that what you think? That I see you as an obligation? Sometimes. You rescued me, gave me work, protected me from Jameson. But I need to know if there's more to it than duty or guilt over your sister." For a long moment, Preston said nothing, and Nora feared she had misread everything. Then he reached out, gently taking her hands in his. "When Caroline died, I thought that part of me died too," he said quietly. "I never expected to feel anything again except determination to build this ranch, to create something lasting. Then you came, with your courage and your kindness, and suddenly the world had color again." Nora's heart quickened at his words. "I've been afraid," Preston admitted. "Afraid to acknowledge what I feel because losing someone again seemed unbearable. And now," Nora whispered, "now I'm more afraid of never taking the chance." His hands tightened on hers. "I do care for you, Nora. More than care. I think I've been falling in love with you since the day you stood on your brother's porch and refused to be intimidated by me or your circumstances." Joy bloomed in Nora's chest. "Then ask me properly." Preston's smile transformed his face, erasing years of solitude and sorrow. He lowered himself to one knee, still holding her hands. "Nora Nichols, I love you. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not for convenience or protection, but because I want to build a life with you, to share everything I have and everything I am with you." Tears blurred Nora's vision. "Yes, yes, I will." Preston rose and with infinite tenderness drew her into his arms. When his lips met hers, Nora felt as though every moment of hardship in her life had been leading to this, to finding home and love in the most unexpected place. The ranch hands, who had been not so subtly watching from various vantage points, broke into cheers and whistles. Preston laughed against Nora's lips, then pulled back to meet her gaze. "I believe our engagement is public knowledge now," he said wryly. Nora smiled, happier than she could remember being in years. "Good. Let everyone know, especially Thomas and Jameson. I'm no longer anyone's property to be claimed except perhaps yours by mutual choice." "Never my property," Preston corrected, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "My partner. My equal. My heart." The wedding took place 3 weeks later, a surprisingly elaborate affair for a frontier ranch. Mrs. Abernathy insisted on proper celebrations, and Preston spared no expense. The main house was decorated with autumn flowers and ribbons, and guests came from as far as Tucson to witness the union of Preston James and Nora Nichols. The territorial judge performed the ceremony in the ranch's front yard, with the mountains providing a majestic backdrop. Nora wore a gown of ivory satin that Preston had specially ordered from San Francisco, arriving barely in time for the wedding. "Do you, Preston Elijah James, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the judge intoned. Preston's eyes never left Nora's face. "I do." "And do you, Nora Elizabeth Nichols, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Nora replied, her voice clear and certain. "Then, by the authority vested in me by the Arizona Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." As Preston drew her into his arms, Nora was vaguely aware of applause and cheers. But all that truly mattered was the man holding her, the future they would build together, and the love that had blossomed from the most unlikely beginnings. The celebration continued well into the evening. Tables groaned under the weight of food, prepared by Mrs. Abernathy and her helpers. A fiddler and guitarist played lively tunes, and even the most reserved ranch hands joined in the dancing. Nora was taking a moment's rest when she noticed a familiar figure at the edge of the gathering. Thomas stood awkwardly, clearly sober for once, watching the festivities with an unreadable expression. Preston followed her gaze. Want me to send him away? Nora shook her head. No, he's still my brother. She crossed to where Thomas waited, maintaining a cautious distance. I didn't expect to see you here. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Wasn't sure I'd be welcome. That depends on your intentions. He looked down, scuffing his boot in the dirt. I came to apologize. What I did, it was unforgivable. Yes, it was. Nora's voice was firm but not unkind. But you're still family. Thomas finally met her eyes. I'm trying to change, Nora. Got work at the silver mine, staying away from the gambling tables. I'm glad to hear it. James is a good man. Thomas glanced toward Preston, who was watching them closely. Better than I deserved for a brother-in-law, all things considered. Yes, he is. An awkward silence fell between them. Then Thomas reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. Wedding gift, he explained. It's not much, but... Nora accepted it, unwrapping the paper to reveal a small silver locket. She recognized it immediately, their mother's, which she thought had been sold years ago for drinking money. How did you get this? Bought it back, Thomas said simply. First thing I did with honest wages. Tears pricked Nora's eyes as she opened the locket to find the tiny daguerreotypes of their parents still inside. Thank you, Thomas. This means more than you know. Preston approached then, his expression guarded but not hostile. Nichols, James, Thomas nodded stiffly. Congratulations. You got yourself a fine wife. I'm well aware of my good fortune. Preston's arm slipped around Nora's waist. Are you staying for the celebration? Thomas looked surprised at the implicit invitation. If I'm welcome. You're Nora's brother, Preston said, as if that settled the matter. Just stay away from the whiskey. As Thomas moved tentatively toward the refreshment tables, Preston turned to Nora. You all right? She leaned into his embrace. Better than all right. I think he's genuinely trying to change. For his sake, I hope so. Preston kissed her forehead. But regardless, you're not responsible for his choices anymore. I know. Nora closed her hand around the locket, a tangible link to her past. But I'm glad he came. Your heart is one of the things I love most about you, Preston murmured. Your capacity for forgiveness, even when it's not deserved. The music changed to a slower tune and Preston extended his hand with a slight bow. May I have this dance, Mrs. James? The new name sent a thrill through Nora. You may, Mr. James. As they moved together under the stars, surrounded by friends and the beauty of the land they shared, Nora felt a sense of rightness settle over her. From the darkness of being treated as property to be traded, she had found her way to this moment cherished, respected, and loved completely. The following spring brought changes to the Diamond. J. Preston, true to his word, had helped Nora establish a proper schoolroom in one of the unused outbuildings. 3 days a week, she taught not only the ranch children, but also those from neighboring properties, and even several of the younger ranch hands who wanted to improve their reading and mathematics. Thomas had maintained his sobriety and continued working at the mine. He visited occasionally, slowly rebuilding his relationship with Nora. Preston remained cautious but acknowledged his brother-in-law's efforts to reform. Jameson, however, proved more persistent. Though he had no legal claim on Nora after her marriage, he continued to nurse his grudge against Preston, spreading malicious rumors in town and attempting to interfere with the ranch's business dealings. His saloon remained a blight on Superior, trapping young women in circumstances similar to what Nora had narrowly escaped. One evening in April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Nora broached a subject that had been on her mind. I've been thinking about Jameson's girls, she said. Preston glanced at her. What about them? Some of them aren't there by choice. They're trapped, like I almost was. Nora's hands rested on her slightly rounded belly where their first child was growing. I keep thinking about your sister and how different my life might have been if you hadn't intervened. Understanding dawned in Preston's eyes. You want to help them? Yes, maybe offer them work here or help them return to their families. Nora looked at him uncertainly. Is that foolish? Preston was silent for a long moment, contemplating the purpling horizon. It's not foolish, he finally said. It's exactly what Caroline would have done, what Elizabeth deserved to have someone do for her. You wouldn't mind. It might cause more trouble with Jameson. Jameson's already causing all the trouble he can. Preston's expression hardened briefly, then softened as he covered her hand with his. If you want to help those women, I'm with you. The Diamond J can become more than just a cattle ranch. It can be a place of second chances. Nora leaned against his shoulder, love for this complex man swelling in her chest. Thank you. For what? For being exactly who you are. For seeing me as more than just someone to be rescued, but as a partner in building something meaningful. Preston's arm tightened around her. You gave me back my purpose, Nora. Reminded me that wealth and land mean nothing without connection and compassion. Over the following months, the Diamond J indeed became known as a place of refuge. Word spread quietly among the women in Jameson's employ that help was available if they wanted it. Some chose to leave the territory entirely, aided by funds Preston provided. Others found honest work on the ranch or in town, their pasts unquestioned. Jameson fumed but could do little without exposing his own illegal activities to closer scrutiny. His influence in Superior began to wane as Preston's more legitimate businesses thrived. In late summer, Nora gave birth to a son they named William Thomas James, after both their fathers. As Preston held his newborn son, the last shadows seemed to lift from his face, replaced by a joy so profound it brought tears to Nora's eyes. He's perfect, Preston whispered, gently touching the infant's tiny fingers. He is, Nora agreed, exhausted but radiant. Our miracle. The first of many miracles this ranch has seen. Preston sat carefully beside her on the bed. Starting with you. As the years passed, the Diamond J flourished. 2 more children joined the family, a daughter, Caroline Elizabeth, and another son, Michael Preston. The school Nora had started grew into a proper educational center serving the entire county. Preston expanded the ranch holdings, but always with an eye toward creating opportunities for others rather than merely building his own wealth. Thomas Nichols eventually became the mine's foreman, his reliability and sobriety earning him respect in the community. He never married, but was a devoted uncle to Nora's children, perhaps finding in them a chance to atone for his past mistakes. Jameson finally overreached himself, attempting to bribe territorial officials. The resulting scandal forced him to flee Arizona. His saloon sold to new owners who transformed it into a respectable hotel. The contract that had once threatened to enslave Nora became nothing more than a distant, unpleasant memory. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Preston surprised Nora with a piano, the instrument his first wife had dreamed of, but never received. Though neither of them played well, their daughter showed remarkable talent, filling the ranch house with music that seemed to honor both the past and celebrate the present. That evening they stood together on the porch, watching their children play in the yard as the setting sun bathed the landscape in golden light. "Are you happy?" Preston asked, his arm around her waist, his voice holding a hint of wonder even after all their years together. Nora turned in his embrace, seeing in his weathered face the same man who had torn up a contract and offered her freedom when she needed it most. The man who had gradually opened his heart to love again, who had built with her not just a ranch, but a haven for those who needed second chances. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she answered truthfully. Every day, I'm grateful for whatever twist of fate brought me here to you." Preston traced her cheek with gentle fingers. "Not fate, choice. You chose courage when you could have surrendered to despair. You chose to trust when you had every reason not to. And you chose to see value in someone society viewed as property," Nora reminded him. "You chose to tear up that contract when you could have enforced it. Best decision I ever made." Preston's eyes, still that remarkable blue that had first caught her attention, held hers with unwavering love. "Everything good in my life came from that moment." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, they sealed their anniversary with a kiss that held all the passion of new love and all the depth of a decade shared. From property to partner, from contract to covenant, Nora's journey had brought her home to the one place where she was truly free, in the arms of a man who had recognized her worth when she was at her lowest. And on the Diamond J Ranch, their story became legend, how love had transformed two broken souls into something stronger and more beautiful than either could have achieved alone.